Screen says it's an unimplemented trap, but the error code is wrong. It's a system error.
So what's the upshot?
It's not going to say hello.
It absolutely is going to say hello.
It's nobody's fault. It's a
You
system
built
error.
the voice demo.
The voice.
However, the vice presidency is also defined by the president. And if we were to come to a different understanding.
Go on. I'll listen.
In the sense that,
And so my first question is, why would you recommend public service to the young people who are here tonight, especially given the increasingly intense scrutiny and even vitriol to which public servants are subjected? Vice President Cheney.
well, sometimes you'll hear discussions by political families about how hard it is. How hard it is to work, to run for office, to put up with criticism and so forth. And it's been just the opposite in my family. I have two daughters. One is now in Congress, the other has a political consulting firm. And my wife, they're three very strong women. When we get together, we usually end up telling war stories about old campaigns. As we started out, I was fairly young when I started the first time, but the kids were really little. But they remember all of that, and I think they consider themselves blessed to have been able to sort of watch up closely how our process, our system works. They have both chosen careers. In one case, Liz, our oldest, as an office holder, as a candidate, but daughter Mary has an intriguing business she runs. She runs campaigns without candidates. She says candidates just mess up campaigns. So she does, gets involved in campaigns about referenda that are on the ballot and so forth. But in our case, we've loved it, been part of it, of our family now for more than 50 years. And I strongly recommend it. Tremendous opportunities, interest, all kinds of ways to be involved. And I was even going to be a political science professor at one point.
Working. Skip over the voice demo.
We need it to say hello.
You're not hearing me. It's not going to say hello.
Fix it.
Fix it?
Yeah.
You're a kinetic leader. You make decisions based on instinct.
I am. People always said that.
Yeah. Very different from your father in that regard. Now, maybe I can handle some of the more mundane jobs, overseeing bureaucracy, managing military, energy, foreign policy.
Vivo mi vida en la tierra. La tierra es lo que sé. Soy un ranchero y no sé nada. No sé nada. ¡Hey!
In 40 minutes?
Fix it.
I can't.
Who's the person who can?
I'm the person who can, and I can't.
How bad are you saying?
It's pretty bad.
I don't know what that means.
It means the demo is more than likely going to crash.
You have to keep your voices down. Joel Pforzheimer is sitting out in the house.
I don't care if... Who's Joel Pforzheimer?
Doug, how long have you been working reception at the Department of Energy? 3 months. Just perfect.
So what am I supposed to do here?
Just sit there and be quiet.
Got it.
How's business today?
We're good. Our stock and California has been really since deregulation.
Great to hear.
Oh, he's with the Energy Department.
The details of Cheney's meetings with the energy CEOs were never disclosed. But a Freedom of Information request did provide some documents, including a map of Ireland.
Demo is flaky. I've been telling you. this thing is overbuilt.
It worked last night. It worked the night before that. It worked 3 hours ago.
Not working now, so just skip over the voice demo.
Fuck you.
Skip over everything else.
Was heavily influenced. Just mentioned, I started out to be a political science professor. I was in Washington studying the Congress on a grant, and then I was going to go back to the University of Wisconsin and get my PhD. While I was there, I worked for some tremendous individuals. A guy named Bill Steiger from Wisconsin, or Don Rumsfeld from Illinois, and most especially Jerry Ford. The day Jerry Ford was sworn in as president, I went back to the White House to work on the transition. But I finished that period of time, really sort of the Nixon-Ford years, having to make a decision about what do you want to do? What are you going to do next? And as I thought about it, I could go make money, or I could stay and be a lobbyist, or, lots of other options. But what I really wanted to do was put my own name on the ballot. That if I was going to be involved in the public arena, public service, I didn't want to just be working for somebody who put their name on the ballot. I didn't like it when I lost a job because somebody else lost an election. So I really wanted to do it myself, and went home to Wyoming and announced for it and did it. Served 10 years, but once I was started, 10 years in the House, 4 years at Defense, 8 years as Vice President. I was a junkie. I loved it.
GQ, he's been shadowing you for a week. Did you notice? Just looks like everything's fine. He's sitting out in the house.
Hey. What are you guys saying?
Some kind of race condition, but we haven't been able to track it down yet.
Is the synthesizer sampling fast enough?
No, so
Iraq's oil fields with all of the oil companies that would be interested in acquiring them if, somehow, they were ever to become available. And then, it happened.
rates are off, and it keeps crashing.
It's 20 seconds out of the 2-hour launch. Why not just cut it?
We can't cut it.
Yeah, you just cut
2
it.
days ago, we ran a Super Bowl ad that could have won the Oscar for Best Short Film. There are more people who can tell you about the ad than can tell you who won the game.
I understand, but the ad said the Mac was gonna save the world. It didn't say it was gonna say hello.
You open the house on fire.
Don't know.
Would you like to lower your monthly mortgage payments or use the equity in your home to consolidate your credit card or other debts? Just log on.
Yeah, this just in, you were looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is
The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
Thank you. It is an honor to be here. As a young man raised and brought up in the public school system, I pledge my allegiance to that flag every single day. And the honor, maybe one of the greatest honors of my life today, is to be here and leverage the work that I've done as testimony that may in some way benefit this nation that I love. I'd like to start by saying thank you to Chairman Corker for your leadership in this endeavor, and to Senator Cardin. Your leadership has been extraordinary, and I'd like to also say thank you to the rest of the committee that has supported this effort. This is a bipartisan effort, and in a country that is riddled with bipartisan separation on so many things, slavery seems to come up as one of these issues that we can all agree upon. And I applaud you for your agreement, and I believe in you and your leadership and your ability to take us out of it. I'm here today to defend the right to pursue happiness. It's a simple notion, the right to pursue happiness. It's bestowed upon all of us by our Constitution. Every citizen of this country has the right to pursue it. And I believe that it is incumbent upon us as citizens of this nation, as Americans, to bestow that right upon others, upon each other, and upon the rest of the world. But the right to pursue happiness for so many is stripped away. It's raped. It's abused. It's taken by force fraud, or coercion. It is sold for the momentary happiness of another. Now, this is about the time when I start talking about politics that the internet trolls tell me to stick to my day job. So I'd like to talk about my day job. My day job is as the chairman and the co-founder of Thorn. We build software to fight human trafficking and the sexual exploitation of children. And that's our core mission. My other day job is that of the father of two, a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old. And as part of that job that I take very seriously, I believe that it is my effort to defend their right to pursue happiness and to ensure a society and government that defends it as well. As part of my anti-trafficking work, I've met victims in Russia, I've met victims in India, I've met victims that have been trafficked from Mexico, victims in New York and New Jersey and all across our country. I've been on FBI raids where I've seen things that no person should ever see. I've seen video content of a child that's the same age as mine being raped by an American man that was a sex tourist in Cambodia. And this child was so conditioned by her environment that she thought she was engaging in play.
Open the house. We're taking a quick break.
Part of the problem is we can recompile, but the hardware, if it's a hardware problem, we can't get into the back.
Why not?
You want to tell her, or should I?
Don't start with me, man.
Why can't he get into the machine?
You need special tools.
What kind of special tools? Just take a
He
screwdriver.
didn't want users to be able to open it.
We've met a few times. It's nice to see you.
Of course. All right, let's get this thing underway.
Scooter, why don't you let everyone know the lay of the land?
Of course, as you all know, I am Scooter Libby, Diggs Chief of Staff. I'm also his National Security Advisor and a Special Advisor to the President.
Technically, Scooter outranks any of Bush's people.
Mary Madeline will serve as...
Well, it has changed dramatically. Say, Leon and I are here today primarily because of our friendship and with Jack Murtha. As I mentioned previously, when I became Secretary of Defense, Jack was chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee in the House. That meant that he was just about the most important member of Congress from my perspective, and the job I had to do of budgeting for defense and providing for us to have the necessary ability to defend the nation. But that was a major accomplishment, major responsibility for Jack. I came away tremendously impressed with all that he enabled us to do, and the effort was, as Leon said, extraordinarily rewarding. You'd be able to look back on that now with some satisfaction, but most of all, the time I spent, I had probably the most important assignment was service as Secretary of Defense, that more than anything else I did.
You need special tools.
Is this for real?
There are 100 engineers walking around here. None of them have the tools?
In fairness, not many of them were issued the tools.
What about you?
I left them at the office. It was 3 a.m. when
Jesus Christ. Cut. Hello.
No.
What's the first rule of a launch?
It's not gonna crash.
I just did.
Counselor to the VP and assistant to Bush. David Addington, Dick's main legal counsel, will play center field on all matters relating to executive power. The president has Alberto Gonzalez, Karl Rove, Karen Hughes as his team. Quite frankly, Gonzalez has no clue. Rove is a hack. Hughes should be in AA ball. So we will have fairly unobstructed...
Well, that's sort of the $64 question when you take one of those jobs. And lots of times it's valuable to look back at history to see if there are lessons to be learned there. I think it's important for people who hold those senior positions take the time if they're going to take on that responsibility, that there's a lot to be learned from our own history. It's also important when you begin to put that together one of the things that happens when new administrations come in, and both the Secretary of Defense as well as the President's involved in this, but there's a thing called the SIOP. It's the Single Integrated Operating Plan. It's the basic plan and capability that would allow the President to order a nuclear strike to be able to respond to an attack upon the United States. It's pretty scary stuff. And presidents are briefed on that before they're sworn in, and look at it, and usually, it'll rattle the rafters in terms of thinking about, you've got 15 minutes.
Andy?
Which one?
The other Andy. You're right there. Why would I be calling out?
He needs to talk to you? Yeah.
The exit signs need to be off, or we're not going to get a full blackout.
We've spoken to the building manager and the fire marshal.
And?
There's absolutely no way they're going to let us turn the exit signs off.
I'll pay whatever the fine is.
The fine is they're going to come in and tell everyone to leave.
You explain to the fire marshal that we're in here.
Access to the Oval Office. We will be automatically BCC'd on all emails that the President receives or sends, as well as have access to his schedule the second that it is set or changed.
We will also be receiving the daily intelligence briefing before the President. That gets us inside the decision curve.
Which we'll actually be reading.
Bush approved all of this?
Fortunately, no one's had to use that since Harry Truman, but the thing I was always, if I were to try to improve on the process to get people ready for those kinds of decisions, I think we could do a much better job than we do of going back historically and looking at the conventional use of forces over that period of time. I know when I went to
changing the world.
I did, but unless we can also change the properties of fire, he doesn't care.
If a fire causes a stampede to the unmarked exits, it'll have been well worth it for those who survive. For those who don't, less so, but still pretty good.
Look,
I need it to go black. Real black. Get rid of the exit signs and don't let me know how you did it. Fix the voice demo.
Anytime the use of force had been ordered up. The going through the process happened to us in the Bush administration, the first Bush administration. We were faced with a situation in Panama where there was a dictator, there were American military personnel at risk. We ultimately decided.
I've been on the other end of a phone call from my team asking for my help because we had received a call from the Department of Homeland Security telling us that a 7-year-old girl was being sexually abused and that content was being spread around the dark web. And she had been being abused and they'd watched her for 3 years and they could not find the perpetrator, asking us for help. We were the last line of defense. An actor and his foundation were the potential last line of defense. That's my day job, and I'm sticking to it. I'd like to tell you a story about a 15-year-old girl in Oakland. We'll call her Amy. Amy met a man online, started talking to him. A short while later, they met in person. Within hours, Amy was abused, raped, and forced into trafficking. She was sold for sex. And this isn't an isolated incident. There's not much that's unusual about it. The only unusual...
Good evening, gentlemen. Tonight we're offering the enemy combatant, whereby a person is not a prisoner of war or a criminal, which means, of course, that he has absolutely no protection under the law. We're also offering an extraordinary rendition where suspects are abducted without record.
3 days using the software that we created, a tool called Spotlight. And in an effort to protect its capacity over time, I won't give much detail about what it does, but it's a tool that can be used by law enforcement to prioritize their caseload. It's a neural net. It gets smarter over time. It gets better and it gets more efficient as people use it. And it's working. In 6 months, with 25% of our users reporting, we've identified over 6,000 trafficking victims, 2,000 of which are minors. This tool is in the hands of 4,000 law enforcement officials and 900 agencies. And we're reducing the investigation time by 60%. This tool is effective, it's efficient, it's nimble, it's better, it's smarter. Now, there's often a misconception about technology that in some way it is the generator of some evil, that it's creating job displacement, and that it enables violence and malice acts. But as an entrepreneur and as a venture capitalist in the technology field, I see technology as simply a tool without will. The will is the user of that technology, and I think it's an important distinction. An airplane is a tool. It's a piece of technology, and under the right hands, it's used for mass global transit, and under the wrong hands, it can be flown into buildings. Technology can be used to enable slavery, but it can also be used to disable slavery, and that's what we're doing. I alluded to a phone call that we got from the Department of Homeland Security about this girl that was being trafficked on the dark web. Now, it's interesting to note that the dark web was created in the mid-90s. It was a tool that was created by the Naval Research Lab called Tor, a tool with absolute purpose and positive intention for sharing intelligence communications anonymously. It's also been used to help people who are being disenfranchised by their government within political dissent in oppressive regimes. But on the other side, it's used for trafficking. For drug trafficking, for weapons trafficking, and for human trafficking. And it's also the warehouse for some of the most offensive child abuse images in the world. Now, when the Department of Homeland Security called us and asked for our help, and asked if we had a tool, I had to say no. And it devastated me. It haunted me. Because for the next 3 months, I had to go to sleep every night and think about that little girl that was still being abused. And the fact that if I built the right thing, we could save her. So that's what we did. And now, if I got that phone call from Greg, wherever you're at, the answer would be yes. We've taken these investigation times of dark web material from 3 years down to what we believe can be 3 weeks. The tool is called Solus. Once again, I won't go into too much detail about the tool, but it's being used by 40 agencies across the world today in beta, and we believe that it's going to yield extraordinary results. And just like Spotlight, it gets smarter and more efficient and more cost-effective over time. So where do we go from here? What do we need? Obviously, we need money. We need financing in order to build these tools. Technology is expensive to build, but the beauty of technology is once you build the warehouse, it gets more efficient and more cost-effective over time. I might be able to present to you a government initiative where next year I come back and ask for less. And to me, that's like, it seems extraordinary. The technology we're building is efficient, it works, it's nimble, because traffickers change their modus operandi, and we can change ours as well, just as efficiently, if not more efficiently, as they can. It's enduring, and it only gets smarter with time. We also are collecting data. We have KPIs. We actually understand that if we're delivering value, we increase our efforts in that area. If we're not delivering value, we shut it down. And it's a quantifiable solution. One of my mentors told me, don't go after this issue if you can't come up with a quantifiable solution. We can quantify it, and we can make the work that we're doing and the initiatives that you put forth accountable. My second recommendation is to continue to foster these private-public partnerships. Spotlight was only enabled by the McCain Institution and the full support of Cindy McCain and a man that I find to be not only a war hero, but a hero to this issue, John McCain. It wasn't just created by them. There was extraordinary support from the private sector. Company Digital Reasoning out of Tennessee stepped up to the plate. They offered us effort. They offered us engineers. They offered us support and pro bono work. We've had the support of companies that oftentimes war with each other, from Google to Microsoft to AWS to Facebook. And some of our other technology initiatives include many, many other private companies. It's vital to our success. These private-public partnerships are the key. The third thing I'd like to highlight is the pipeline. You know, we sit at the intersection of discovery of these victims, but the pipeline in and the pipeline out are just as vital and just as important, and addressing them are just as important. I'd like to highlight one thing in particular, that being the foster care system.
Have you gotten the Prime Minister yet?
Canada's Prime Minister's on the phone. That's right, we got planes in the air. Nowhere for them to land.
Permission for them to land at Canadian airports. International flights into Newfoundland.
I still have one plane on the kind of for Pennsylvania.
Sir, Don Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon on line 3. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
You have authorization to shoot down any aircraft deemed a threat.
There are 500,000 kids in foster care today. I was astonished to find out that 70% of the inmates in the prison across this country have touched the foster care system, and 80% of the people on death row were at some point in time exposed to the foster care system. 50% of these kids will not graduate high school, and 95% of them will not get a college degree.
Presidential authority?
That is correct. All orders are Unidir.
Unidir, sir?
Unless otherwise directed.
Mr. Vice President, are we sure these are the proper rules of engagement?
The country is under attack. The ROE is fluid. David?
Yes, Mr. Vice President.
Now, we don't know exactly what the people in that room were thinking, but it's safe to assume that at least one person wondered why, in the midst of the most fateful day in American history.
But the most staggering statistic that I found was that foster care children are 4 times more likely to be exposed to sexual abuse. That's a breeding ground for trafficking. I promise you that's a breeding ground for trafficking.
Was Dick Cheney talking to his lawyer?
Mr. Vice President.
Start working.
Mr. Vice President. The congressional members you sent to Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center want to leave.
Nope.
Excuse me?
They're not going anywhere. Just tell them we have all the helicopters.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your call, Mr. Prime Minister. We have the situation.
But the reason I looked at foster care is that it's a microcosm. It's a sample set that we have pretty extraordinary data around to date, even though we can't seem to fix it. It's a microcosm for what happens when displacement happens abroad, as the unintended
Yes, we are very aware. Yes, that is correct. Thank you very much.
Are we at war?
Yes, we are.
With whom?
consequences of our actions or inactions in the rest of the world. When people are left out, when they're neglected, when they're not supported, and when they're not given the love that they need to grow, it becomes an incubator for trafficking. And this refugee crisis, if we want to be serious about ending slavery, we cannot ignore it, and we cannot ignore our support for this issue in that space, because otherwise we're going to deal with it for years to come. The outbound pipeline, there's just not enough beds. The bottom line is, once someone is exposed to this level of abuse, it's a mental health issue. And there aren't enough beds, there's not enough support, and we have to have the resources on the other side. Otherwise, the recidivism rates are through the roof. It's astonishing, because when Maslow's hierarchy of needs are not being met, people resort to survival, and if this is their means of survival and the only source of love that they have in their life, that's what they go for. So we have to address the pipeline out, and we have to create support systems on the other end. It's not an entitlement, it's a demand to end slavery. My fourth and final recommendation is the bifurcation of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. They're both aberrations, they're both awful. They're both slavery, and they're both punitive, in fact. But the solution sets are highly differentiated. When you look at sex trafficking, a victim is most often present at the incident of commerce. And this provides an opportunity for drastic intervention. Whereas in labor trafficking, the victims are being hidden behind the manufacturers and the merchandisers. And it requires an entirely different set of legislation and proactivity and enforcement in order to shut it down. Now, there's a lot of rhetoric that's going on in the world right now about job creation in the United States. Well, if we want to create jobs in the United States, I would ask you to consider eliminating slavery from the pipelines of corporations. Because a lot of that slavery is happening abroad. And if we ask those corporations under extreme pressure that if you don't change it, you are going to be penalized. And if you don't clean up that pipeline, it's going to mean trouble. And they're forced with two decisions. They can either clean up the pipeline abroad, or they can move the jobs to the United States of America where they can be regulated and supported. Bringing jobs to America can be the consequence of doing the right thing, or it can be the consequence of doing the wrong thing. But that choice is up to you. Now, it's not lost on me that all of this disruption in our marketplaces is going to have economic backlash. Like, that is not lost on me at all. But I ask you, do you believe that Abraham Lincoln had to consider the economic backlash of shutting down the cotton fields in the South when he shut down slavery? Because I'm sure that weighed on his mind. You know, happiness can be given to no man. It must be earned. It must be earned through generosity and through purpose. But the right to pursue it, is every man's right. And I beg of you that if you give people the right to pursue it, what you may find in return is happiness for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Made among our principals. This was early in our administration. It was already over with. The people who had plotted against Noriega had been overthrown, shot, and we just blew it in effect. It wasn't a
Understanding. What about the emails? Paper shredders don't work for emails.
The entire administration will run off the RNC's private server.
And we've deactivated automatic archiving. We're clean.
Okay, so over at the Pentagon, we got Don, Secretary of Defense. Paul Wolfowitz, who worked with Team B in the Ford days, Deputy Secretary of Defense.
Let's check, see what plans they have to invade Iraq.
Out of that came some careful decisions we made in terms of how we were going to deal with these issues and these crises type situations, specifically with the use of military force. Now, it's never perfect. It's never, you never have all the facts you'd like to have. And in case of Iraq, of course, our first experience was in Desert Storm when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990. And we went in with our U.S. forces and did, I think, a commendable job in driving him out of Kuwait and restoring order to the government in Iraq. Later on, when we went back in 2003, the issue turned more than anything else on the question of weapons of mass destruction. From the time that we were sworn in,
Got Ashcroft over at the DOJ. State seems to be the only tricky department. That's Colin Powell. His guy, Lawrence Wilkerson.
Colin Powell, never met a camera he didn't like.
Wilkerson's a true believer.
We got Bolton over there. He's a loose cannon, but he's loyal.
And we get Liz in there as well. Let's make sure that happens.
Okay, Dad.
Consider it done. And this list of our people does not include about 800 others, lobbyists.
Yes, we were receiving the very first brief, I still remember, warned about Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction. For the next 17 months, we got a constant drumfire of that kind of reporting from the intelligence community. In the fall of '02, there was a thing called a National Intelligence Estimate prepared by the community at the direction of the CIA. It's about as heavy a report as you're going to get in terms of really serious consequences. Again, warned about Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction. On the weekend, while we're in the planning process, we had a Saturday meeting in the Oval Office of the President, myself, the National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, I believe, was there, and George Tenet, who was the CIA director, and his deputy. And after they'd briefed on this whole group of intelligence reports that supposedly laid it all out for us, President Bush asked, he said, gentlemen, he said, George in particular, he said, how good is the intelligence on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? And the answer he got was, it's a slam dunk, Mr. President. It's a slam dunk.
Industry insiders that we placed in the regulatory jobs.
What about Bush's friends? Ridge, Pataki, Thompson? I haven't heard their names.
Yeah, they were not offered jobs in this administration at this time.
Not offered jobs at this time. Are you even more ruthless than you used to be there, Dick? You're just not getting laid.
All right, moving on. Got Paul O'Neill.
I think he's deadly serious about his aspirations. I always hark back to the decision or the announcement he made, I guess an opinion he expressed, that the collapse of the old Soviet Empire was one of the worst events to befall mankind in human history. He didn't like it when the Soviet Union went out of business at the end of '91. He's clearly demonstrated an interest in trying to recapture, or at least to reassert control over some of the states that are no longer part of the old Soviet Empire. I think the work he's done with respect to using the modern technology to try to interfere with our elections is a really threatening piece of business, that we should not tolerate it, that we ought to find ways to respond. I am reluctant to specify exactly what could be done, I guess. A lot of it you can't talk about. But the fact of the matter is we ought to be able to take action against him, to recognize that he represents a major national security threat when he begins the process of trying to control or influence our elections.
World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers.
It does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Dear God.
That looks like a second plane.
Mr. Vice President, we have information that a plane is headed to the White House at this moment. We have less than a minute to get to the secure underground bunker. Let's go! Move! 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 It's clear!
The hospital is being evacuated, we're told, and clearly that shot that we have on our screen now, this is the Pentagon just across the river from Washington, D.C. You gotta believe.
I need you to take me to Dick.
This is Cheney. We cannot go back to the White House. I'm being told no one is to go back to the White House. It is not safe.
I agree with much of what Leon said. But part of the problem is you cannot organize the kind of effort that succeeded in defeating the Russians in the Cold War. I mean, it's not that long ago. January of '91, as I recall, the Soviet Union went out of business, just ended. A lot of the member states became sovereign, free, and independent states. And a lot of that came about because of the work of the United States leading the free world in the efforts so that it became clear to the Soviets that they could not match what we were doing in terms of our capabilities, in terms of our technologies and so forth. But it will not happen if the United States doesn't make it happen. There isn't any other nation in the world that can take on the kind of leadership role we have and succeed. And otherwise we'll get fragmentation of various coalitions out there. NATO is one of the great success stories in the history of diplomacy. It costs money, but those funds, U.S. troops deployed over there, all of that ultimately provided victory and guaranteed that the Russians couldn't go forward with what they would have liked to have done, and that was to take an even larger part of Europe. So the responsibility is ours as a nation if we're going to keep things on the level they need to be on as we claim victory in the Cold War. I worry now, and I think Leon's articulated it very well, as long as we get into the posture where it's every man for himself, where we're not interested in alliances, we're not willing to deploy troops or work with other countries, then we will not be able to take on the kind of responsibilities that's been so important to our survival for the last 75 years.
Let me throw a little bit of a change up in here. Vice President Cheney, you represent an oil, gas, and coal state, an energy extraction state. In fact, I interviewed for a job in Casper, and the price of a drink at the hotel bar was 10% of the closing price of a barrel of oil that day. So some sensitivity to the Secretary Panetta, you're stranded in California. I understand partly because of some difficulties associated with the fires ravaging California. And I wonder to what extent, if we're talking about national security threats, I know the Department of Defense addressed potential national security threats posed by global climate change. Secretary Panetta, do you want to make a couple short responses to whether you see any threats associated with that? And I'll let Vice President Cheney take a short chance to answer.
No, look, I think there has to be a recognition of reality, and the reality is that that climate change is real, and that we need to confront that. And I viewed the impact of climate change, along with the military establishment at the Pentagon, as something we needed to pay attention to. In terms of its impact on security, because if there were increasing droughts, if there were increasing refugee flows that resulted from that, if there are rising seas that are going to impact on our installations or on coastline bases or on coastlines generally to force populations to move, all of that represents the potential for security threats. And so I thought it was important to be able to have an area there that would review what the threats were as a result of these changes taking place, in order that we could build it into our intelligence position and into our planning for the future, so that we could deal with potential threats if they happen.
It's pretty hard to argue with the notion that climate change is a real problem, especially when you look at the tragedy that's currently proceeding, even as we meet in California. And the question, obviously, I think is increasingly, we're getting to the point where everybody has to admit there is climate change. There's still a debate over how it's caused, and that's not surprising. But it's going to be a major challenge of our time, and for this generation and future generations.
I know we're running short on time. I see that a couple people have asked Vice President Cheney about his opinion on the upcoming movie Vice, starring Christian Bale as Dick Cheney. I'll hold off on that question for a minute.
Come on, Leon, they'll do it to you someday.
Both it's going to be the Italian version.
Are strong people with strong personalities and strong views, passionate about your positions, and you've both worked for a boss, a president. And so there are some people interested in, given the personalities and the passion that you have, how's your relationship with your former bosses?
Well, I think pretty good. We didn't always agree on everything. With respect to the movie, it's Hollywood trying to make a buck. I haven't seen it. I had nothing to do with it. My wife is, she's intrigued because Amy Adams has been asked to play her, and she thinks that's all right. But no, it's Hollywood. I haven't seen it. I have seen the trailer. My 18-year-old granddaughter, who just went off to college at the University of Wyoming. She saw it before anybody else did. And she called up and she said, Grandpa, I saw the trailer on your movie. And I said, well, what did you think? She said, well, it says you were a real badass, and that's cool.
I